Hey everyone, this is Nadia at Remote from a cold autumn day here in sunny South Africa. Welcome everyone to our webinar about relocation for international expansion. For international employees. I hope you all truly enjoy this today. I'll do a quick introduction to Remote, the company. We basically help businesses from all over the world with payroll, benefits, and compliance. So all you need to do is have an amazing hire that you want to hire somewhere in the world remotely in a distributed fashion, and we'll be able to do all the rest. And I'd like to introduce our speakers today. I quickly introduced myself already. I'm Director of People at Remote, and we have two of my amazing colleagues joining us today. Roderick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Roderick van Vliet. I'm the head of legal of Remote, and happy to be here.
Great, over to you, Filipa.
Hey, hello everyone. I'm Filipa Matos and I'm the VP of Operations here at Remote. Also happy to be here.
Awesome, great. So I'll start presenting our slides and this is all about us. Our agenda for today, I'll just quickly cover. We're going to talk all about why compliance matters, what types of relocation we have available today, the challenges around relocation and international relocation specifically, and then we'll end the call with a Q&A session. During the session, we'll also have some live polls, so look out for that as we continue the call and the webinar. So I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about what sort of compliance needs you have and why this is important and why we should be talking about this today. As you can see, a lot of employees wants to continue working remotely and ideally wants to live in places of their choice. These are some great statistics from the Global Workforce Revolution report that you can take a look at. And for this reason, in order for us to embrace remote work and also to retain amazing employees, this is the part of why we should be talking about international relocation. We're going to run a poll live. If all of you can partake and fill out the questions for us, we would absolutely love to get some of your votes and your answers. Great. I'm just going to look at the poll and see once we can, get some answers in. Kristen, I'll rely on you when my screen changes to know when that poll is complete. While we're waiting for the poll, I also want to just highlight that a lot of organizations are now increasing the remote work options. We have some further statistics about that. This also creates a great opportunity to allow for international talent and to give folks an opportunity in locations where they would have never been able to work for a Silicon Valley tech startup or a global remote international company. And so for this reason, this is also why we should be talking about the compliance piece of relocation and remote workers. Great. Do we have those results? Awesome. Great. So great poll. It looks like 44% of all of you are already remote. That's incredibly exciting to me. And I see there's a 47% we're increasing remote work options. Brilliant. So that looks like employers that's highlighting why we should be going remote and why we should continue talking about distributed teams. Right. I'm going to go over to the next slide. We can close. There we go. Thanks, Preston, for closing that. And let's start talking a bit about the types of relocation today. In this particular webinar, we're going to focus a lot on long-term relocation. So keep that in mind as we share our thoughts about the different relocation options. The types we will cover is travel. So basically just international travel, short-term relocation, and long-term relocation. I'm going to ask Roderick to tell us a little bit more about the three areas of relocation.
Yes, thanks, Nadia. It's good to start with the beginning because the assumption is that the company is in country A, and then at a certain point in time, one of the employees will be in country B. But then the reason why that employee is in country B can be different. And we make a distinction between three types of relocation. And you can see that on the next slide, actually, where you have travel, short-term relocation, and long-term relocation. And well, we go more about long-term relocation in a bit, but to start with the other two, travel and short-term both are defined by their short-term. So for a couple of months or maybe a year or something, but it has a clear end date. And then the distinction between travel and short-term relocation is that in case of travel, the ground for that is a tourist visa or a business visa or something that brings you as a foreigner temporarily in that country. And short-term relocation actually brings you in that country as a resident. So you will start living there, register at the municipality at an address, but still not for a indefinite period, but for a fixed term. And if you then a little bit of foreshadowing to what comes next, it gets more complicated when you become a resident, and it becomes more complicated the longer you stay. And that's also why we are focusing on the third category, the long-term relocation. Filipa, can you maybe add a little bit on that third category?
Of course. Thank you, Roderick. So in a nutshell, long-term relocation means that an employee is moving to another location for an extensive amount of time. So it's something that it's not intended to be temporary. This can be anywhere from a couple of years to indefinitely. And usually it's directly related with residency. Of course, that's the main difference between short-term and long-term relocation is exactly that, the temporary part of the situation. So short-term is for a temporary situation with a limited period of time. It can go, as Roderick mentioned, from a couple of months to up to a year. But when it comes to long relocation, we're talking about something that is more permanent, and it can vary from a couple of years to indefinitely. Of course, that, with long-term relocation, a lot of things need to be considered. So you need to think about some of the topics that we will discuss later in this presentation, but it's more complex to take care of a long-term relocation than short-term relocation or traveling, of course.
Yeah, and that actually leads a little bit to what we do, right? So a lot of organizations have this opportunity to let their employees work in the location of their choice, but they don't necessarily have entities in those locations, right? And so this is really where remote comes in and supports that requirement, and that's what we're working on, is opening entities and locations to support that from a compliant perspective or a compliancy perspective. Right, so I think we have another poll coming up on the next slide. So I'll go over to the next slide so long. And we're going to have another live poll, a little bit about the primary challenges. Sorry, let me just move that forward. Roderick, I'm just going to ask you, is my slides moving forward? Is it showing primary challenges right now? Yep. Good. Yeah. Awesome. I had a small delay and my screens weren't coordinated. Great. Okay. So we're going to chat a little bit about the primary challenges of relocation. Preston, if you are ready to get that poll live, we have some questions for the audience. Would love to get your input on this and tell us a little bit about the biggest relocation issues that you're currently experiencing. Would love to talk a little bit about this. I'll let this run for about a minute and give you all time to answer. See, there's some questions popping up in the Q&A as well. I'm excited to get to those at the end of this webinar. So thanks for asking already, or thanks for commenting. Cool, nearly there. We can wrap up in a few seconds. Cool. Looks like the poll is in. Waiting for the results. There we go. Great stuff. So this is exactly what we want to chat a little bit about that. So thanks so much, everyone, for sharing your concerns and the challenges you're experiencing with us. Looks like international tax is still the highest challenge in international relocation. I appreciate that great feedback, and also on the compliance and employment law side. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. We are
If I can jump in there quickly.
Yeah,
I think this actually reflects also what we would expect. So not by a large margin, but at least that tax is on top of mind. Of course, that every country has its own specific tax laws. But I think it's good that we start with immigration, because it apparently is the least on people's minds. Whereas, very simply, if somebody is not eligible to be in a country, you have an issue, and that can also lead to quite some challenges. So yeah, let's start there.
Great call out. So let's move on to the next slide. Immigration. Roderick, are you going to deep dive us into this topic, please?
Well, actually, maybe I can kick off the immigration topic. No worries at all. So, well, it's important to say at this point that any relocation can be stressful, and that is a very important aspect of the entire process. So both employees and companies should make sure that this is a smooth process, that everything goes well, that they have the right partners on their side to support through this process. Immigration comes up as one of the things that we should consider when we are looking into long-term relocation, because there is a huge topic around right to work in a particular country. And right to work can be super different from country to country. You will see that each country has its own specific types of visas. They also have its own eligibility requirements. So there is a lot of things that can be different from country to country. And that is, and usually these processes are not the type of processes that we can say, okay, no, we have these 3 types of processes, and we have a group of employees that we would like to relocate, or they want to relocate to a particular country, and we can use this process for everyone. That's not a thing for immigration. So immigration processes are very personalized, and we need to take into consideration individual situations, so we can make sure that we are, running into a successful process. It's important to mention that, with the current situation of the COVID-19 around the world, processes around immigration are being they have quite of a backlog in terms of the in-country authorities are dealing with huge amount of processes, and this is delaying a lot of these processes. So it's good when you can partner with someone that can help you to push forward these processes, that can help you to understand what are the specifics, the things that you should be considering. And it's not just, a matter of the company as employer looking into the process. This actually will be a relation, a partnership between 3 parties. It's all about the partner, the employer, and the employee. And everyone needs to be aligned in terms of the end result. It's very important to keep that in mind. And also, when you're looking into long-term relocation, immigration process should be one of the first things that you should kick off, because usually these type of processes, they take several months. They are heavily administrative. So it's very important to expect some level of back and forth with documentation, and also those things that they are part of the process, and some delays that are now expected due to the pandemic situation. When it comes to, in-country specific requirements for visa, of course, that this is something that should be taken into account, but it's also important to mention here that you can also look into options like the EU Blue Card, that it's a work permit, and also will allow you to live in a given country inside of the EU area. And that is something that usually takes like 3 months to obtain if you are meeting all the eligibility requirements. And it's somehow a good option for people to go live in the EU zone. And also the same will apply to the US green card, because it also allows employees to live and work from all of these the 50 states in the US. So of course that we can also consider this type of options when looking into long-term relocation, specifically on the immigration topic.
Thanks, Filipa. In my role specifically, I've often seen that employees certainly take this seriously, but sometimes there's just not enough experience from their side as an individual to really know what they're dealing with. So is there anything you can share with organizations to ask early on in the hiring process to check whether someone has the right to work or has eligibility to work in a country?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nadia. Actually, I believe that that should be one of the pre-screening questions before you actually get into the first interview. You want to make sure that you're hiring someone that has the right to work in a particular country. Otherwise, the company might be in a very difficult position. So you don't want to hire anyone that is not legally allowed to work in that particular country. So it's very important to confirm with the candidate beforehand if they have the right to work. And inside of right to work, it's very important to name the different options, because of course that you can have a work permit in that specific country, but then you will also need sponsorship from your company. And it's important to know that beforehand. Or maybe you already have your residence visa and then you don't need the sponsorship from your company. So I would actually recommend to ask this type of questions beforehand if you want to make sure that everyone gets an amazing experience through the recruitment process with your company.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Right. So Roderick, over to you. I want to chat a bit about international tax. Can you share with us what's the biggest risk here?
Yes, of course. Maybe it's good to take one step back and remind everybody what taxes are. That's that a country wants a piece of the action of what the business is doing. And that, of course, gets interesting when a business is in more than one country. And that means also when you start having employees in other countries than where you're originally incorporated, this comes up. Then where are you making the money and where should you be paying the taxes? And that's on the easiest one is the income tax, but also on corporate income tax itself. And then the familiar phrase that comes to mind is then the permanent establishment risk, which means the determination that a company is actually physically present in a country without maybe being there incorporated. And there's a whole long list of potential indicators that make that happen. And one of them relates to the workforce. So where are your people? Where is the work done? Where are the decisions made? Where are your managers and executives? And how that question is answered differs per country and differs from time to time. So it's not an assessment once done and then forever okay. You will need to reassess this every time. And this really plays also in if you would have long-term relocated employees abroad. Because if you would look at starting with their income taxes, you need to determine the tax residency. And that's then the second point. And tax residency is not the same as your normal residency. It differs per country. And most countries have tax residency directly linked to your actual residency, so where you live. But a glaring example of where it's different is the US. There, if you are a US citizen, it actually follows you down even if you're only a part of the year in the US itself. So that means that if you work in Europe as a US citizen, you could be a tax resident in two countries at the same point in time. And then, of course, you jump into the issue of what happens if two states have a tax claim on your income. And that is usually arranged via the tax treaties. You have the international organization, the Organization of Economic Collaboration and Development, and that has some standards for tax treaties. And the general solution is that then the country in which the person resides, so where it's effectively long time is relocated, that country has precedence and can claim the withholding of the income taxes. But as always, there are exceptions to that rule. So especially if in one given fiscal year, an employee has been in more than one country, it's probably the best thing to file in both countries, just to make sure that you don't omit any tax filing. And well, based on the treaties that arrange the taxes, then hopefully there will be no double charging. Omitting to file, even or omitting to withhold as a company, may result in additional fines that could be prevented. So we tend to advise to be careful there. And also here you see the difficulty of having obligations in two countries. So that also ties a little bit back to how we approach things in our own business model, that we always hire local for local, meaning the employer is in the country where the employee is. We actually travel along with the employee travels, meaning that this topic is a little bit easier.
Got it. Thanks for sharing, Roderick. I have a question for you on the international tax side. So let's say I relocate long term with my family to a different country, and let's say it's close by, whether that's Kenya or a different country to that effect. Ultimately, I cannot, depending on South African tax law, and that will depend from country to country, I cannot long term relocate and then live in that new country and still pay income taxes only in the country that I'm from, right? I've got to then consider the local income tax laws and base that, because that's usually a confusion. I've seen a lot of people ask us, hey, but pay me in the US and I'll work in the Netherlands for you, or I'll work in Germany or Italy, or whatever the case may be. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. And this ties back to you need to pay taxes where your tax residency, and that is in most countries then linked to that residency itself. So when you register in a new country, you actually expose yourself to becoming a tax resident there and to need to pay taxes over there. So the exception to this rule will be the digital nomad that doesn't register anywhere and just travels about and maybe has his fixed address somewhere in the States or in London. And in that case, you can, as long as you're not longer than half a year in the same place, in most countries, at least in Europe, you can prevent to becoming a tax resident there. But it also means that you don't live there. So you don't have an address, you don't have any connection to the country, which can be, of course, an issue in terms of insurance or health or things like that. So if you are looking for the standard, I want to be an employee and I want to have my safeguards and I want to live somewhere and be registered, you need to switch to the new country with your tax filings as well. Yes. Got
it. Filipa, I think you had something to add. Just so you're unmuting. Yeah.
No, actually, Roderick just mentioned what I was about to mention. Yeah. Thank you, Nadia.
Great. Thanks for covering that, Roderick. So we're going to go over to the next one, which is employment laws. Filipa, if you can tell us a little bit about the employment law side and the biggest risk in this side of the challenges companies can experience.
Thank you, Nadia. Well, actually, this is our day-to-day, right? Here at Remote, we deal with employment laws from several countries around the world, and we want to make sure that everything is 100% compliant. So we keep on, receiving updates in terms of employment law for all of these jurisdictions. And when it comes to relocation, it's very important to understand, the consequences of not complying with the local employment law. It's very interesting to see that, sometimes for something that we don't know as a company and we think that we're doing the best to accommodate our employees' needs, but if it's something that it's against the employment law of a specific country, this might cause some hard consequences to the company. We can be caught up in fines or penalties, and it can be both, bad for the employee and the company. So when looking into relocate to a specific country, it's very important to understand what does that mean for the employment agreement of that specific employee. That's where remote, as Roderick and Nadia were just mentioning, we have our local entities. So whenever we need to hire someone in a specific country, because that person is based in that specific country, the employment agreement that they will get, or the employment package itself, it's not only about the employment agreement, because depending on the country, you will also need to present different type of documents at the onboarding stage for that employee. So all of that is drafted and it's aligned with the specific jurisdiction on where the employee is based. And that is very important, because something that comes as something natural in a particular country might be not allowed in another country. And it's very important to have a look at this when we are talking about relocation. And maybe you're talking about someone that was used to live and work in the US and suddenly they moved to Italy. And in Italy, you will face different types of laws and requirements when it comes to employment. For instance, you know that in the US we have at-will employment, but there is not such a thing in Italy. So you have, notice periods, you have severance payments, you have a lot of things that you need to accommodate as probation periods, as health and security checks, and a lot of things that are required from the employer to accommodate the statutory requirements to onboard someone. So it's very important to partner with someone that can actually provide all the guidance on these in-country specifics. And Roderick, between us two, we've been, involved in all of these drafts for the several countries where we are currently based. And I know that we've been discussing between us two that it's very interesting to see how things are somehow different, but the values in terms of employment are pretty aligned within countries, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And the big struggle is also that if you then start drafting a local employment agreement, fully in line with the local requirements, but then you want to do that for a remote working employee, you bump in all types of uncertainties, basically. Because the place of work is the responsibility of the employer, but what if that's your living room? If your employer is not even in that country, how do certain things just practically work? And that a lot of those questions don't have really clear answers yet, because the local law, labor law, is archaic, does not provision for these situations. Maybe an interesting example is that health and safety also means health and safety inspections, and that usually happens on site, so that somebody from the government comes by and checks the office. But that would mean that somebody should go into the employee's house. So we as remote actually try to fight that off, and also prevent that they have a right to, because we think that the right of privacy and family life should prevent a government for barging into your house and having an opinion about your living room. But those are interesting angles and actually gaps in the framework of the new way of working, which is just not.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see that some of the countries are already moving towards that. And basically, because this is being forced by the current situation of the COVID-19, the pandemic situation. And now you can see governments starting to talk about, okay, should the employer actually participate on the expenses that these employees are incurring because they are working from home? What should we do? What should be the position of our country towards that? How can we make sure that we are protecting the work-life balance for our employees? So these discussions are starting. We are also seeing there are not a lot of countries, but we are also seeing some countries that are faster than the others. So they are starting to accommodate some of these things and actually have some rules, not all of them, but some rules around remote working. But I think we will get there sooner rather than later, for sure.
Brilliant. Thank you both for sharing. To summarize, what I heard from this last topic was really a lot of companies like ourselves, and often people in my position, want to treat all their remote workers exactly the same, but there's certain statutory requirements that you have to meet based on that country, right? And that's where we come in to help to ensure that you're still compliant in that location, regardless of the global policies that you're building. And those local labor laws and those local statutory requirements have to be met. Otherwise, you might get into some real trouble. Great. Awesome. I think we're ready for our Q&A questions. Awesome. Okay, I see a few of them have been answered already, but let's see if there's one that we can answer live. So Filipa, I see you've answered the first one from Aiden Dunn. Aiden, just double checking if your question is, yeah, let's answer this one live. So Aiden, do you want to verbalize your question to us? Okay, I'm trying to see how. Now his question is gone. Krishma, I'll go over to you. I see you located in the UK. Is there a minimum duration requirement for needed to file a second or third country? And this is from Krishma. Roderick, I don't know if you want to take this one. So this is probably tax duration.
I assume this is a tax question, and it depends a little bit on what filing is meant. So with income taxes, there are usually two things that are important. One is the withholding done by the employer. So that means that you need to inform as soon as you are living in a second or in another country. You need to inform your employer so that they can adjust the income tax withholdings accordingly to the new location. And then at the end of the fiscal year, you have your own income tax filing. And that really depends per country how that works, if it's automated or not, if there are standard forms or how that is done. So no clear duration there. And for the first one, for the withholding, arrange it upfront with the employer, because every month, every salary, there is a withholding. And if you miss one, it will come back at the end.
Great. Thanks for answering. Krishma, I hope that answers your question. Sabine has an interesting question. How does the pandemic, especially in remote work, impact the taxation law?
Yeah, I can take this one as well.
Cool.
This is funny. So we see that, for instance, the rules for visas have actually a clause in there that if you cannot go back to your own country and there is a force majeure, you can stay longer. So a lot of people are now trapped somewhere overseas, but the tax rules didn't change with it. So if you are then breaching, for instance, that 183 days rule, you will become a tax resident in the country where you're staying. And in other cases, so about the expenses of your coffee at home or the desk or the headset or whatever, it's also still lagging behind. So there are some minor things in countries, but in general, it's taking a bit longer.
Great, thanks for sharing. I'm going to go over to Erica. Erica, thanks for your question. Do digital nomads still pay taxes in their country of origin?
Well, I can take that one. Well, Erica, it will depend actually on the country that we are talking about. Okay, some of these, and it's important to mention here at this point that we are used to hear this concept of digital nomad visa, but actually some of these programs already existed, and they are somehow work permits. Okay, the main difference is that they allow you to stay for a specific period of time in a given country with specific benefits, let's say, that can accommodate for you to work and live from there for that specific period of time. And that this can vary from 6 months up to 5 years, but usually you will see these happening, between 1 year and 2 years is the most common length in terms of visa, digital nomad visa. But when it comes to your question, for instance, I can provide you with an example. In some countries, you need, in order to apply for the digital nomad visa, you need to register yourself as a business, let's say. Okay, so you will need actually to create somehow an individual entrepreneur scheme that it's seen as a business. And because of that, you will need to pay taxes in the country where you're staying. That, depending on the country that we are talking about, and depending of your tax residency, that may impact, that may also mean that you will need to pay taxes on your tax, or let's say on your country of residency, and not just on the country where you're living from a temporary period of time. So it's very important to look into these situations. I can share with you a specific situation from two people that they were, traveling, and for 7 years they traveled everywhere and they worked from every single country. It was amazing, an amazing experience for them. But then they were establishing these businesses in all of these countries, and they were not filing their taxes or paying their taxes on their anchor location. And after all of those years, they received a notification that they would need to pay. We are talking about these two people who were based in the US, like the anchor location was the US. So it's very important to look into the specific situation, understanding the different countries, and actually get expert support on this situation.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing, Filipa. Aidan, I've got your question again. I think I accidentally probably dismissed it when I tried to answer it earlier. So Aidan, you have a great question. If my company is based in Ireland and I am an Indian citizen, for example, and this Indian citizen wants to return to India but remain working at this company, does work permits still apply?
Well, in this case, I would say that not work permits per se, because this is someone that is already a citizen of India, so work permit will not apply. But this is more of a question not towards immigration topic, but more of the employment law topic. So it will be important to understand what these mean in terms of employment for this specific employee, if they will remain having their employment anchored to the Irish company or not. So it's very important to accommodate the employment law piece instead of the immigration, because work permit will not apply in this situation.
Yeah, and Aidan,
Roderick, I can add to that this goes back to that applicable employment law in your employment contract. So if you would have a UK employment agreement and then go to India, that agreement would then be subject to Indian employment law. And even though there might be a historical connection there, there will be many differences. So that will probably require repapering, making some changes to the benefit package and the statutory minima in PTO, holidays, things like that. And of course, you will need to pay taxes in India again.
Yeah. And Aidan, this is exactly where we come in. So if you don't have an entity in India and you want this particular person to be able to go back to India, this is how you can hire them and make sure that they're still legally and compliantly employed. Thanks for your question. Sarah, so good to have you. This is from our own team. We often hear about digital nomads, people that jump from country to country all year long. Is this not a real possibility? What are the implications? So we touched on this earlier. Roderick, do you want to take this one?
Yes, this has a very practical angle to it, because if you don't have an address somewhere, how are you insured? How do you have a bank account? How do you receive your mail? So not having a residency anywhere is hard. I mean, it's possible. You can go off the grid, can live on a boat. But if you don't do that and you still have a residency somewhere, that makes you most likely tax resident in that country for starters. And then you have the exposure to all the countries where you're traveling to. And especially as a digital nomad, if you don't have the proper visa to actually work in the country where you are, the chances of enforcement are small, but you are actually in violation because you're working somewhere where you don't have the permit to work. So this works because it's done by a limited amount of people, so they fly under the radar. But if you look at it from a compliance perspective, there are all types of smaller and bigger risks you're running into.
Got it. And if their country, would their country of origin still remain an income tax location if that is still where they get their post and where they're potentially paying some sort of rent or have a house or family?
Yeah, I would
great.
expect that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Right, let's go over to more questions. Anna, thank you for your question. Does the 183 days rule apply within EU as well?
Yes.
Yes. That's a strong yes.
Yeah, this also applies to the Schengen area.
Yeah.
So that's a bit other region, but yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for answering. Nick, over to you. So does remote outsource your legal, or how do you make sure you remain watertight with all the legislation? I guess either partnering with solicitors or hiring solicitors to work for remote using remote. That was Nick's question.
It's a combination of everything. So we have an internal legal team, my team. We're growing that as rapidly as the company is growing to keep a grasp on plurality of the complexity of being available in all those countries. But we also have in every country where we are available local advisors. That's threefold. So that there are employment law advisors, corporate law advisors, and tax advisors. They help us as early as that, even before we are in the country, with the setup, how we can best offer our services and be compliant, and going forward with the maintenance of that. And of course, we also have a system of being aware of changes and upcoming changes in legislation in all those countries as well, to make sure that we retain compliancy through the years.
Great. Thomas, I think we missed your question, so let's go over to you. What are the benefits of using remote.com for formal employment in various countries versus having contractor relationships with remote employees, which are already legally residents of their own countries? Great question.
Yes.
This is quite a meaty one. Filipa?
Yes, thank you, Nadia. Well, Thomas, this is a great question. So, let's start with, this piece of having contractor relationships with remote employees, which are already legal residents in their own countries. So it's important to mention here that when you're engaging with someone through a contractor agreement, you really need to make sure that they are actually a contractor. So that means that they are not only working for you, that they have several clients, that they have a specific project, because if you're dealing with your contractors as they were your employees, you might incur on a misclassification risk. So it's very important to understand and to properly classify and do the distinction between contractors and employees. And that's why remote can help on these specific cases. We can not only help you to understand if you are at risk of misclassification regarding your current structure, looking at the contractors that you have now, and also the differences between the way that you deal with your current contractors versus your employees, and also helping you being compliant towards those team members and making them proper employees if that is the case. If they are working only for you with a working schedule, or working or being part of an internal team, making use of the benefits, being part of the internal policies, all of that might expose the business to misclassification risks.
Yeah, and it's easy to do that because ultimately, even if someone has paid time off, they're treated like an employee. So yeah, great. Thanks for answering. Christina, I'm going to answer yours next. Can a European company with no entity in the US employ a freelancer without going through remote.com? So basically paying for the work done, or are they liabilities?
I think it's basically the same question as the previous one. Now, in principle, you can use contractors to do the work, but contractors are not easy or cheap employees. So when it's not clearly an one assignment and that's then the job done, or when it's not clearly somebody doing work for multiple companies at the same time, you are actually being deemed an employee. And of course, again, there's the question about enforceability, but in principle, that's a violation. An interesting example to maybe give is the UK used to be pretty flex, just like the US currently is. And actually, as of next month, there will be a new tax ruling in the UK that will make it way more likely that the misclassification is being highlighted and that the contractor is being deemed an employee. And normally that just gives you that it becomes an employee and that you need to pay it like the employee. Only in the UK it goes a bit further. You don't get the benefits of being contributing to the social contributions. So it is the pay, but not the benefits of an employee. So it works like a penalty. So enforceability remains the biggest reason why it is still a thing in the world. But if you look at it from a compliance perspective, this misclassification is just incorrect.
Great.
But important to mention here, if it's a freelancer, so someone that is, working with you for a specific project, specific assignment, something that is, one-off or something that it's periodic and they actually have other clients, then you don't need to have an entity to actually hire this freelancer to provide you with their services. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Filipa. Over to Erica's question. How do official holidays work? For example, if my company is based in the US and my workers are in different countries, are we obliged to give them US holidays or local holidays, depending on their country of residence? Erica, I'm actually keen to answer this one myself. I think as Director of People at Remote, you have to comply to local statutory requirements in those locations. And so I always encourage companies to be really flexible with this and make sure that local public holidays are taken by your employees and that you don't force one country's public holidays on an entire global distributed team. Do one of you want to add anything to this question? Good.
Yeah, one thing.
Yeah.
There's always the question, is a public holiday in addition to the holidays you contractually offer or not? And actually in most countries, it's free choice. So you can decide whatever fits your internal policy best. To say you got, 25 days plus public holidays, or you got 35 days including holidays. So that gives a bit of wiggle space to maybe make it match again to your more global policy on leave.
Yeah, that's a great one. And especially if you can make sure the minimum is higher than the minimum statutory requirement, then you're also safe from that perspective. Great, thanks, Roderick. Emilia, over to you. So how can digital nomads ensure they have proper documents if they do not have an address in certain country? That's an interesting question.
Okay, so well, let me try to understand if I got the question right. So, how can they ensure if they have the proper documents if they don't have an address on the place where they moved to? So, if that is the case, or are you asking, like, I don't know, Nadia, Roderick, what do you think? Is this something that is regarding the anchor location? I think so, right? Or no?
Yeah, and so how I read this from Emilia was that how does the digital nomad ensure they've got the proper paperwork? This nearly ties back to if they don't have the correct travel visas, that's the type of paperwork they'll need, in my opinion. And then also making sure if they do actually remain longer in a location, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That they become a tax resident there, and so registering for that.
Mm-hmm. It's very important to mention always in these type of processes, getting a partner that really understands the specifics of the immigration process. It's so important. It will save you a lot of back and forth with authorities. It will be a much better experience for everyone to make sure that you have someone that can advise you through the process on the type of documents that they will need to present.
Maybe one point to add, what's quite positive is that some very nice islands somewhere around the equator actually have those digital nomad visas specifically. So they are actually luring in those very wealthy, often freelancers or contractors to come spend money on their island while working there. So that they actually provide for documentation for the situation.
Great. Yeah, great. We have time for a few more questions. So I'll go over to next question. Nick, thanks for your question. As you scale, will there be a review of costs over time for employers? As it stands, there's about a £1,000 cost on top of what we typically pay for a UK employee, based on local legislation or statutory requirements.
It depends on how narrow you define this, but if you are talking about the employer's part of a salary, so on top of a gross salary, think more about 25% of that salary. It's way more than that 1,000. If you're talking about just the overhead of of your compliance function, that could be more in line with this. How we approach this is that we, as a service, we actually charge our clients with the cost of the employment. So whatever contributions the employer needs to make to the local country social security will be included in that. And we take care as part of our service offering of the local compliance. And we do that for a little bit less than that 1,000.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Roderick. I'm going to go over to Priya's question. Priya, thanks for your question. For e-commerce companies where products are sold online and the agents are hired locally in many locations, what kind of taxation applies to the agents? Are these people examples of digital nomads?
Well, they could be, but we should actually understand what you mean with agent and what the contractual relationship with those persons. If you mean with an agent, that is actually a person or legal entity that sells stuff on your behalf, then the good thing is that the taxes are their concern and not yours. And it really depends on how they have structured it. So if they have started a small company for themselves and then the company is locally registered, then it should pay corporate income tax with the company. But there are different forms and variants to it. So it's hard to get more specific without the example you're looking for.
Yeah.
But as a principle, if it's a different legal entity, a different company, you are not responsible for their taxes.
Yeah, but Priya, if you treat them like employees, then again, that could be a risk, right? So if they're not true agents, then I think that will fall into a high risk category. Right, we have time for one more question. Leslie, thanks for your question. When companies post, I see there's another one coming, so I'm going to try and fit that one in as well. When companies post that their job is remote, but also say something like, this is a good question, in USA or North America, how can someone know if they need someone who is a citizen legally versus physically in a region? I'll start by saying, Leslie, that sometimes there's restrictions around how you advertise positions, right? And so on platforms like LinkedIn, but on many, many others, you have to add a location. And so sometimes remote companies are restricted by the location availability of remote anywhere as a location, and that's just not available in many, many platforms, amazing platforms. So we as an organization are trying to influence that, and we truly hope that that will be more available in future as we advertise positions. 99% of our positions are remote anywhere. We have a few location-specific positions, and that requirement is more about the time zone potentially, if that's client-focused, or if we're looking for something very specific, like a legal expert in Roderick's team located in Singapore, Japan, or Malaysia that's got that type of Asia Pacific experience. So I think that's just something to note. It's a really tricky one. But there's also companies that advertise their positions as remote and then specific to USA or North America, and they might mean that they can only hire in that location because they don't have entities in other locations. And we truly hope to help those organizations to hire global remote talent. Amelia, you had another question. I'm keen to answer this one. I'm keen to get an answer from my colleagues on this one. What are the rules, taxes and residency, etc., that applies to freelancer, so owner of an online business working in a different country? This is quite similar to the one Amelia had earlier about the agents? Oh, sorry, that was Priya. So I'm keen to see. This looks similar to the agent question. Freelancers.
In this case, it's more about what type of taxes are you subject to, and it depends how you have structured yourself. So if you have a legal entity, in which capacity you offer that freelance online businesses, then that legal entity needs to pay corporate income tax. Usually, if you're a small business, there are incentives and help you pay less taxes in the first couple of years. And that company is incorporated somewhere. I mean, that should be in a chamber of commerce somewhere. So that's your first hint of tax residency, location of incorporation. However, if that's a different location than where you are actually performing the work itself, that might change based on permanent establishment rules. And as your business grow and you are starting to have more business in other countries as well, those countries might again want a piece of the action and might want that the revenue created in their country is taxed there. But I would say that's a concern coming with size. So if you have an online business and you're incorporated in one country and you are living in this country and working from the country, it's pretty safe to say that you're just a tax resident there and you're okay there.
Great. Thanks for answering, Roderick. That's all we have time for today. I just want to thank everyone for attending our webinar, and Roderick and Filipa, thanks so much for answering all our questions and taking us through all these important compliance-related aspects of global employment. If anyone has further questions and want to reach out to us, please visit remote.com, super easy to remember, and let us help you to hire global talent and have amazing, distributed, inclusive teams. Thanks so much, everyone. This was awesome. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.